Yeah, Kevin Lewis, formerly professor of theology and law at Christian apologetics program at Biola. I was there for about 30 years. Uh, my main love and area is Bible and theology. Taught systematic eclectic theology for that time, and because the bottom line is, if you don't get the right God, the right Christ, the right salvation, it doesn't matter where else you're right. So that's why everything we do in the Christian life has to first go with Bible and theology. Know the truth, so the truth will set you free. And this is why I do an entire semester-long course on biblical demonology and the occult. This is literally a condensation of miraculous proportions to try and cover the kind of things we cover here. But one thing is, on my website, I run a nonprofit called the Institute for Theology and Law. We're redoing the website right now. So my personal website is theolaw.org. All the handouts that I'm going to cite from today are listed there. They're my teachings. Huh? Yeah, Theolaw. The thing is, though, you go there now, GoDaddy was messing with us. It's going to say not secure site or whatever. That's because my certificate expired. It doesn't mean it's not secure. It means I didn't pay GoDaddy another $120 for a certificate. So just letting you know. And again, my interests. Bottom line is I told my seminary students for 30 years, why are we here? It's very simple, but the mission gets clouded. We're here everyone in the world has fallen and in sin and on their way to hell, eternally suffering for all eternity apart from Christ. If you don't believe that, you're in the wrong place. That's why you got to go and relay all these foundations all the time, because we get distracted. So what do we do as leaders, Christians, and others? We get people to saving faith and help keep them in saving faith until they die. That's our job. And that entails what? Teaching the truth, knowing the truth, refuting error, all sorts of stuff. But there's so many things that are not relevant to that. It's like, these are eternal consequences. These are the things where we should get up every day and say, check, check, check. And now your hair should be on fire, running around screaming with your hands in the air because people are dying and going to hell without Christ. And if you don't, so that's why, again, the deception, the lies, the chaos of the world, it's so easy to get even focused on good things that aren't essential things. So coming to a topic like paganism, demonology, and the occult, again, the classes I taught, it was first and foremost theology, systematic and eclectic theology, which is Titus 1:9, which says, if you're going to be a leader in the church, you have to be able to both exhort in sound doctrine and refute those who contradict. How did sin start? With a lie. Yeah. Know the truth, and the truth will set you free. And this is why the battle is always for the mind. It's always for truth. And what is truth? Again, with current generation of skepticism and postmodernism and agnosticism and everything, truth in the classic Christian and Western idea in the biblical sense is the correspondence theory of truth, which is that if my ideas or propositions, correspond to a mind-independent reality, they have the property of being true. So our job is to get rid of all the deception, we believe, and know reality as it is, which is there is a sovereign, holy creator God that made us and rules the universe. And we owe our very next breath, our very being and existence to him. He created the substance of the world out of nothing. If he decided not to maintain it in existence anymore, we would cease to exist. Even unbelievers have the gift of existence, even if they don't have the gift of eternal life, existence in the image of God. So going back and stripping away all the falsehoods to get to reality as it is, that we have this great sovereign creator God, that he's holy, that he hates sin, that. I mean, to sum it up, why were we created in the image of God? So we could experience in a limited, changeable, mutable sense, the internal happiness, blessedness that the three persons of the Trinity experience for all eternity. Yeah, that's why you see, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and your neighbor as yourself. If you've done this, you fulfilled the whole law. Love fulfills the law. So mutual blessing and kindness and getting, and it's, oh, by the way, it's okay to be a hedonist as long as you're a Christian hedonist, okay? That you seek, we were created to be happy, to enjoy. The problem is that we have because of sin, because of our false ideas and lies, we have appetites for all the wrong things. But that's based on falsehood and lies. So that's why when we lay the foundation to study something like false religion, which is everything from atheism to, the other end of the scale, what are cults of Christianity? That they claim to be Christian, but they deny some kind of essential doctrine. Everything in between, all right, what's atheism? A positive statement, God doesn't exist. Here we're on a worldview level, God doesn't exist, all right? So you have basically stardust that accidentally clumped together and keeps bumping into each other. How do you get any shoulds or oughts or meaning or anything else? There's no ground or foundation for that. So this is why when we start looking at how can anyone live consistently with atheism? How can someone live consistently with polytheism, these other worldviews? And again, you can't. But as we go to a worldview level, that's the thing, is exhort in sound doctrine and refute those who contradict. This is why actually pastors are supposed to get paid to be Christians. Because I tell my students, why should someone pay you to be a Christian? Nobody else gets paid. And the answer is you're supposed to be the God, Christ, Holy Spirit, Bible apologetics expert that is set aside for that expert knowledge to help other people. And if you are not operating on that level of expertise, get out, because you're going to ruin the church, you're going to ruin people's lives. It's like if you go to a bad lawyer, a bad doctor, a bad any other academic professional. So this is why we got to constantly raise the standards, because they keep falling. So now, again, this is, like I said, this is a seminary education, much less a semester course on demonology and the occult. Because when we talk on a worldview level, you're talking about what exists, what they call ontology. What are human beings in that worldview? What are ethics? What's knowledge? What's morality? What's, all these kinds of things. And it's only Christian monotheism that actually someone can live 100% consistently with. Now, normally I have about a 3-hour lecture that develops that and all the worldviews, but atheists say words like should and ought all the time. But, stardust in a chaotic blender accidentally bumping into each other is an is. There is no ought. It's the sociologist fallacy. It's the is-ought fallacy. Why? But people know torturing babies for fun is wrong. Raping women for fun is wrong. It's built into us. We know it's a universal. Our issue as Christians is how do you draw out these falsehoods in people? But that's part of the practical theology. How do you minister to people effectively with this? So on this, we go back to now on a worldview level. I was here this morning for the introductory lecture, but in 3 decades teaching this course on demonology and the occult, having sort of a specialty in it and doing ministry in this area. One thing is that the more that you have the occult, neo-paganism, and these things on the rise, what are you really getting with it? Why it's called neo-paganism? Because you look at the biblical era, essentially you had one monotheistic religion that represented the creator God. And what was everything else? It was magical polytheism. You go to Babylon, you go to Tyre, you go to, and then, around the world, you have, the entire continent of Africa was what? It was Afrocentric paganism or polytheism, magical worldview. We now look at, South and Mesoamerica, and what you have? Aztec, Mayan, Toltec, polytheistic magical worldviews with human sacrifice and all sorts of other things. The biblical religion was unique. What you did have is kind of in India, you had a development of sort of a polytheistic pantheism, where no, all is divine, everything is one thing, this monistic idea, but now you have these thousands of manifestations of the one divine. So it's a functional polytheism, but in theory, it's everything is divine. Now, of course, think about this: is everything is divine and everything is one thing. What does that make you? Divine. So what's salvation in Hinduism? Self-realization. You forgot you were God. You have to be reminded and convinced that you're God. And then you're like, excuse me, how did God forget he or she was God? Okay, yeah, yeah. Also, you say only one thing exists. Why are you talking to me? There's two things here. I mean, just constantly, also, if we're divine, how is there any right or wrong? How do we get it wrong? If I'm God, whatever I do is right. See, and this is how, on a worldview level, now you get to polytheism, which is ultimately, at least in classic paganism and the occult, that's where you've got this world of, this is important, a bunch of limited spirits with power. And whether it's the Roman pantheon, the Greek pantheon, the Norse pantheon, I mean, with Thor and Odin, and you start going down the list, every culture, you have this tribalistic, bunch of gods that are supposed to be. So, but see, you can see the problem with polytheism is, okay, which god do you follow? Well, Odin's the big god. Well, the only reason is because Loki hasn't defeated him yet. Or Hulk, right? Okay, depending on which DC or Marvel universe you're in. But on that, you got to remember that anything that is created and limited and changeable can do what? The very idea of change means there's growth. We as human beings, we grow in our knowledge all the time. Right now, you're getting sense perception of ideas and adding to what we call your dispositional knowledge and memory and everything else. Even though you're thinking one thought at a time, you go out of the room, you can think about all the stuff you heard. This is part of your dispositional knowledge. How we value and weigh that as good, true, and beautiful gives us a particular orientation to desire it or not desire it. And that's how the intellect and will works with respect to limited created creatures. And with us in the image of God, we're created for morality, we're created for beauty, we're created for, love and fellowship. But the problem is, literally 1 minute, you can believe something is true about God, yourself, the purpose of life, what brings happiness. And the very next moment, you can believe that was false and have an appetite for something else. That's why when we look at the very nature of paganism, the occult, and the magic worldview, now the handout, I mean, you can download if you want. It's called The Occult. I have it on my Theolaw website. I mean, it really comes down to this. It started in Genesis 3 with this, the first fallen angel, Satan, Lucifer, is doing what? He's telling half-truths and lies to Eve. God says, the day you eat the fruit, you will surely die. And you look at, that account in Genesis 3, and what do we find? Genesis 3, 4, and 5. The devil says, surely you shall not die. The day you eat of the fruit, your eyes will be open and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. The entire realm of paganism, the occult, false religion, all the magical practices comes down to that, okay? And that in reality, you have a single, eternal, self-existing, omnipotent, omnipresent, all that, creator God, which is self-evident that if you spent 2 seconds thinking about it, how do things get made? Things don't make themselves. You look at design, you look at the purpose of eyeballs and teleological arguments, and there's a creator, okay? And this in natural theology we talk about is, Kalam cosmological arguments. And, we know that there's a creator of the cosmos who made us and designed us, teleological arguments. But also the fact that we look at not only natural theology, but natural law. Romans 2, laws written on our heart, our conscience bearing witness. Everybody knows these moral principles. And why does false religion exist? Think about it. Whether it's, whether it's from on the philosophical side with atheism and skepticism and so forth, everybody's dealing with guilt. We know we're going to die, and we fear punishment after death. And I'll get to the pagan stuff real quick, but I'm kind of like draw the big picture here. On this side, we understand dealing with guilt. How do I deal with my guilt? Well, the atheist says there's no God, therefore there's no universal law I can break. The skeptic says, if there is a law, I can't know it, so I'm not guilty of it. So that's one whole higher area of our apologetics and false philosophies and false religions. What's the other side? Okay, so you have trying to deal with law. When we talk about what is the gospel, false religion is false gospel. Yes, we acknowledge there's guilt, but I've been promised by Buddha, Mohammed, Zoroaster, Confucius, and everybody else that I can do enough good works to make up for my bad works. False religion. That's how the other half does it. When here's the real issue, and I'll spend 1 minute on this because this will summarize the whole Bible. Okay, you understand what the problem is and why salvation has to be by grace alone, through faith alone, in Christ alone. Because if you have a broken relationship with someone, how do you fix it? If I go home today and after 40 years of a perfect marriage with my wife, I go home and I say, she goes, how was your trip? How was your conference? And I just slap her, you're stupid, you're ugly. I've never liked your cooking, and eat gads. Yeah, grow up. And then I go in my study and shut the door. How much does that 40 years of good behavior buy me? So then she just smiles like the Stepford wife and goes, everything's great, honey. Yeah, no, that's when instant break. I have, through my unholy behavior, breached shalom, the peace that I've had with this relationship with her. And the only way I can get that back is, let me do this. There's some homeless people at the park down the street, so I'm going to go home and make sandwiches for all of them, go deliver it to the poor, go help little old ladies across the street, then go home and tell my wife, see, stupid, now you got to take me back and be nice to me because I did some good works. Yeah, but see, that's the fallacy of all the world religions. The fact is that we were created to have a relationship with God. We broke the relationship by, again, dishonoring God, turning away from him. I mean, for those of us who have kids, and I do a lot of pastoral counseling, one of the greatest hurts you can have from your kids is complete lack of gratitude. I mean, when parents are like, I just did everything for them, and they just don't care. Think how God gives us everything, and the gratitude that we don't give him for every single thing. But the fact is, we have breached the relationship. How am I going to get my relationship back with my wife? It's simple. If she's right to not treat me in a loving, kind way because I breached it, and I'm hostile to her. So how am I going to get the relationship back? One, and here's the atonement. She's the offended party. She's the only one that can decide to bear that harm that I caused the relationship and not hold it against me. And once she's done that, she's substitutionarily has borne the penalty of separation because she's willing to do that. But what does it take for reconciliation? I've got to repent. I've got to want a holy relationship with her again, acknowledge the harm. And all I can do is know of an offer of reconciliation and come to her and say, I was a jerk, a Jerkosaurus Maximus Rex. So can you take me back? Sure, honey. But why did that happen? There's no works. It's by grace. It's reconciliation. And based on what? The offended party bore the harm, chose not to hold it against me, and I repented, confessed my sins, and accepted an offer of reconciliation. That's it. Guess what? That's how, and that coming up on, Good Friday, Resurrection Sunday, and we're coming up on the most important events in the Christian calendar. So how do we reconcile with God? Because all of this in context is going to understand why paganism and polytheism and the magical worldview is so awful and how it distorts so horribly the free gift of God. So who's the offended party in our sin with God? God. Okay. I know some of you are going, I don't know. It's like, yeah, God. All right. So God is immutably holy. He's just and the justifier. God could no more overlook sin than you and I could overlook baby murders. You see someone torturing a baby for fun, you by nature would hate that, be repulsed by it, and not want any fellowship with that. That's by nature. And that's with our defective moral compass. How much more is God with his perfect holiness just aggrieved by our lack of holiness? So with that, so God must punish sin, but the wages of sin is death, spiritual and physical death. How can God die? Well, God can't die, but he's the offended party. So what does God have to do to be just and the justifier? God has to become a man without ceasing to be God. Merry Christmas. The incarnation, the second person of the Trinity, assumes a full human nature, personalizes it, so we have a God-man, fully God, fully man, one person, walks the earth, lives a perfect life in our place, and then we're coming up to Good Friday, takes the spiritual and physical death on the cross that's due to us in an intensive way and rises from the dead. What's there left to do? God has borne the penalty. Repent, confess, know of the offer of reconciliation, and want a relationship with God again. That's why salvation has to be by grace through faith. I mean, the idea that you're going to go give sandwiches to the poor and say, yeah, now I'm reconciled to God, that had nothing to do with anything anymore that, now my wife has to forgive me because I went and handed out sandwiches to the poor. You have to deal with God. So this is the gospel as clearly stated as I think as you could ever understand it. Why it has to be by grace through faith. If you change what salvation is, you'll change what atonement is, and you'll change what, the means to get it. So that's why when you get to the fall of human beings, like I said, you've got false monotheism in modern Judaism and Islam and Unitarianism and deism. And what do you have there? Essentially, either you do enough good works to make up for your bad works, aka most types of Islam, or it's basically all your problems are temporal anyway, so you end up with people are basically good. Liberalism, as we say, or modernism in theology was simply Enlightenment philosophy that became Unitarianism that crept into the seminaries and the churches. So there was no Trinity, there was no deity of Christ, there's no incarnation, there's no penal substitution, there's no resurrection. And so what do you have now for salvation? Salvation is education. Jesus is a mere man who's a prophet who taught the best love ethic of anybody who ever lived, taught you how to live better. And everybody has the ability to repent and live better and follow the Jesus love ethic. Now, it's not Christianity anymore. It's essentially, it's just Unitarianism, but with Christian terminology. So now, like I said, so you look at the philosophy of the occult now. Once people are fallen, and this is important because how do we apply this doing evangelism and everything else? Why do people join any false religion? But let's stick with, why would someone become a witch? Why would someone be a neo-pagan? Why would someone do this? Well, what are the effects of the fall? We know we're going to die. We have a sense of guilt. Okay, we feel powerless. We want to have security about the afterlife. All these things were the same reasons why we actually become Christians are the same reason people join false religions. They're trying to deal with the effects of the fall. But what's unique about paganism, in other words, magical polytheism and its classical thing, now you can be a magic practitioner and be an atheist. You can literally be everything. In fact, atheist chaos magic, they think they're doing avant-garde science. They think they're doing what alchemists were doing in the medieval times, that they weren't really doing magic. They just knew cutting-edge science, which was chemistry. So you'll find people who are Satanists or claim to be ceremonial magicians or something like that who are really atheists. But they see themselves as cutting-edge scientists. That's why now you can't presume everybody's a polytheist. You really, in fact, the one rule you want to make sure of when you talk to anybody who's part of a group like this is don't ever tell them what they believe. The most eclectic, pluralistic, syncretistic, everything is that people who are neo-pagan, magical, witch, whatever practitioners, they make it up as they go. They draw from whatever source they want to draw from and make up their own religion. And that's why most covens or groves or grottos, there's various names for the groups, they're relatively small. In fact, the big thing, I don't know, so there was back in the late 70s, early 80s, there was the big satanic scare going on in the Christian community. And somebody named Mike Warnke claimed to be the satanic high priest and, all this stuff. And there was, thousands of people in the satanic group. And Bob and Gretchen Passantino wrote for Cornerstone magazine, did an expose on it. They started chasing down all the witnesses. And it came down that, the guy wasn't even a Satanist. He made it up. And, but this is important. Take the most selfish people you know, and how many selfish people hold hands and sing Kumbaya together with other people for a greater cause? They don't. So that's why virtually all the Satanists are independent and selfish. So when we get to the very nature and philosophy of paganism and the occult, which, by the way, I don't know if that was covered this morning, but did they tell you what the word pagan actually means? The Latin word paganus? Yeah, it means rural people or rural. Why? Because pagan was a Christian term when the empire was Christianized by Constantine. You couldn't now practice your demon worshiping religion in mainstream culture. So these were the people who were on the outskirts of civilization to continue practicing the old religion and the old ways. So pagan literally just means the rural people. Okay. So, and then the word occult is just another Latin term, which means secret or hidden, which means all these magical practices that were practiced out in the open. Well, if you were going to stay in Christian civilization, you had to do it in secret. So that's why even those words, those are Christianized terms for these old polytheistic magical religions. We use the term pagan and so forth. So we go back to Genesis 3 and 4. God says, surely you're going to die. What's the promise to Eve in the garden? Remember, let's see, I have a perfect marriage. Everything is good. I'm happy all the time. Yeah. But it's not as good as it could be. Yeah. So, no, wait, God did what? God told you you're going to die? You're not going to die. Well, no, you didn't die physically that day. You just died spiritually that day. And then eventually you're going to die physically. The day your eyes will be open. What's the promise there? God's keeping secrets from you. He's keeping happiness from you, a greater happiness. So the appetite kicks in. Really, 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 right? So that kicks in. Your eyes will be open. Now you'll know the secrets that God's keeping from you. And so instead of a proper relationship of shalom or harmony or peace in the universe, that we as the creatures recognize the creator for who he is, and submit to him, and that creates what? That's harmony. That we submit to a heavenly Father who knows all, is all good, and all these things, and makes our lives great. No. The day your eyes will be open, you can figure out your own truth, keep the secrets. You will be like God. Forget the hierarchy. Now everything's equalized. You can be your own God. You can be your own decision maker. Knowing good and evil, you can decide your own ethical code. That was from the beginning. That was the promise. So when you get to the very concept of polytheism, and the magical worldview, which is what we're talking about here, that was the entire non-Christian world. I mean, that was literally the Babylonians, that was the Romans, that was the Greeks, that was the Norse, that was for every Yoruba in Africa, that was the Mayan, Toltec, Aztec religions in Meso and South America. It was magical polytheism with different names for the gods, but this is why we get into the concept of demonology. Bottom line in classic, theology is, look, God, there's two creation accounts in the Bible. There's one where God made human beings, and there's one where God made angels. There's a fall of human beings, and you see that there's a fall of the angels. And yeah, Michael Heiser's stuff been going around. He presents some interesting theories on this. But even if his stuff ends up being true, well, there aren't just angels because there are these little g gods that are created and these others. It's like, okay, but what do you end up with? A created, finite, mutable, contingent spirit that has moral ability and knows its duty to God. And they either remain faithful or they rebelled. So it becomes a distinction without a difference when we get into practical demonology and spiritual warfare. So on this stuff, it's literally the concept of in the biblical world. Once you have the fall of the angelic world, where again there's a whole long list of lectures on that, but Satan falls. Whether or not you take the Revelation 12 and the other passages that that he took a third of the angels with him. That's a lot of fallen angels. And you want to understand demons, it's actually very simple, okay? Think of criminals without bodies. That's demons. Now think about it think of the worst criminals around today that you can think about. I mean, the worst gang members, the worst mafia bosses, the slickest con artists and con men that you can come across. And they're max, 70, 80 years old. Now think about this in even a young earth creationist view where, the sons of God shouted for joy when God laid the foundation of the world. The angels have been around at least before the creation of the earth. So even in a young earth view where you maybe have a max of 10 or 20,000 years, you have spirits that have learned how to do stuff for 10 or 20,000 years. And if you have human beings that are 10 to 15,000 years old, and the demons fell right before that, remember, you got a fallen angel in the Garden of Eden. You think of the evil that can be done in 30 or 40 years, the ability to practice that. How much can you learn in 10,000 years? You think about the hardness of heart that somebody can develop through habituation of sin in 40, 50, 60 years. Think about 10,000 years of hardening your heart. So you're dealing with, and my degrees are theology, law, in these areas. I'm a practicing attorney. Like I said, I work with a number of these groups. But I used to do prison ministry too. I'll tell you, talk to the guards there. He said there are certain areas of the prison where the mafia bosses and everything are kept, and he says even the guards don't want to go there. He said you can feel the evil. They're so hateful and so awful. He said you don't even look them in the eyes because they'll order a hit on your family. Yeah, this is how scary they are. So my stupid students, it's like, okay, you're demonology. When do we get to see a demon? Did you bring a satanic Bible with you? Shut up. Demons are bad, okay? Would you ever want to meet a real mafia boss on their turf? You don't want to meet a demon. You don't want to chit-chat with them. The few times you'll have to deal with it, you shut up, and by the authority of Christ, get out. That's all you want to deal with them. And, people don't realize the depth of evil you're dealing with. Well, this is what's going on when we look at the origins of the occult, the magical worldview, all of this. And again, this is a semester's worth of material, but in the biblical worldview, in fact, the word demon, and this is one too, for those who are interested in biblical interpretation and translation and all that. You got to think about this. Every time we translate a Bible to a new culture with a new language, see, you're always trying to think of, formal equivalence, dynamic equivalence. Is how do we get the concept across, the proposition, without changing the Bible to the point where it doesn't mean the same thing, but at the same time, people can understand it, okay? When you take a verse like, all we like sheep have gone astray, to a culture that's never seen a sheep before or understand the behavior. So these are the kinds of things. So you think about in the Old Testament, when the Septuagint was translated from Hebrew to Greek, about 70 years before time of Christ, And so what do you have now? You have this Hebrew language and ideas and cultures that's now translated to Greek-speaking people, post Alexander the Great and Hellenization of the world and all this. So who's Yahweh? The one true and living God who's creator. Of course, there's several other titles for God like Elohim and Adonai and all these things, but the word that's used 6,000 times in the Old Testament, his covenant name, is Yahweh, which, by the way, we still continue the practice today. We put Lord in all caps for that. What the Jews did in their Hebrew text, they put the vowel points for Adonai, say Lord, in place of Yahweh, for the sake of reverence. We still do that in almost all our translations. We put Lord in all caps. So read the Old Testament, you see that 6,000 times. That's the Yod, He, Vav, and He, God's covenant name. So, but as you're doing this translation work, well, who's God now? Well, the Greeks and the Romans had theoi, the major gods with most of the power, right? Poseidon and Zeus and all that. They were the theoi. They're the ones who controlled creation and did all this. The spirits that were still powerful, but less than the theoi, were the daimon or the daimonion. And that's where you get the idea, who are these fallen angels? Well, they gave the name for them of the daimon or the daimonion, okay, the demons. That's how we get that. So who are they? They're created, finite, mutable spirits who fell, who have bad hearts like bad human beings. They hate God and they hate us, and they do wickedness. So this is why when we get into the motivations of biblical data and things on demonology and the occult, like I said, there's an entire bunch of Bible verses on this, but the bottom line is this: Deuteronomy 32:17, 1 Corinthians 10:19, 20. This is repeated throughout the Bible. The things to which the Gentiles sacrifice, they sacrifice to demons and not to God. Paul, the Old Testament, the book of Revelation, talks about Revelation 9, 20, and 21, talks about the worship of demons and sorcery, is that the Bible identifies these little g gods, okay, as demons. So you're dealing with the world of the demonic. And the prohibition on this, again, they're all throughout the Bible. 1 Samuel 15, right? Rebellion is of the sin of witchcraft. That just takes you right back to Genesis 3. It's rebellion against God. Why? Because when you get to occult practices now, and that's what, Carlos and I talked back and forth for a couple of months on what to cover in here. He gave me about 10 hours of stuff to cover in an hour or so. But on this, we have... if you're a fallen human being and you fear people, you think about this. What do you want? Well, you want to protect yourself. You want to heal yourself. You want to do all this. It's one thing to say, by the way, Christians were supposed to say, not my will, thine be done. If you actually look at the, is that the heresy detector terminal? Just wondering. So just check. I got to get a little further into the lecture. I got to keep tabs on this. But got to remember, the right is not my will, thine be done. All throughout the world of the occult. The Wiccan Rede, R-E-D-E, which is basically their motto or one theme, is as long as you harm none, do what you will. Who gets to decide what harm is? The individual Wiccan. So it translates into do what you will. What's the, for the Church of Satan, what's its one rule? The law thelema, do what you will. That's it. Which goes back to what? You will be like God, knowing good and evil. It's right back to but here's the problem. When you decided it's my kingdom come, my will be done, what do you need to do that? You need power. You need knowledge. And you need your little helpers. Now, the concept of power is basically the capacity of a given thing to produce effects. So virtually all effects are one of two kinds, motion or mutation. Like I can push this chair because my capacity as a being has a certain amount of power, but it's limited. I can push this chair, but I can't go out and push the building the same amount of distance. See, that's motion, okay? Or you can change a thing or an object. So we talk about God being omnipotent. It means God can do with his power all things that are logically possible. God can't create a square circle, a two-horned unicorn, or anything like that. Why? Because it's logically impossible. It has nothing to do with omnipotence. Okay? So we get here, all right, the whole world, right? So all the occult practices, and one of my handouts I've got that I spent a lot of time on in the class, it's called the Occult ABCs. I mean, I've got, and I lecture on this, I've got 173 things that are identified as occult practices. And virtually all of them fall into one of those three categories. So what's power? This is the whole idea of magic and sorcery in a nutshell. You figure out some source of power because I can't stop my enemies. I can't heal my body. I can't live longer. I can't do this. So what do you need? All magic, and those that practice it, Aleister Crowley is attributed with the one who started practicing real magic with a K. The stage magic, prestidigitation, they still spell with a C. But so what's magic? Whether it's, again, pyramid power or whatever you're trying to tap into, the very idea too of, which in, fantasy role play, Harry Potter stuff, Lord of the Rings stuff. What do you have? The basic idea is you have someone who can take in power, and then you're able to take it in some way. And that's from everything from, classical ceremonial magical worldview. That's why you see people with like their little moon shapes on their cloaks, or they're wearing a certain, pointy hat that's supposed to absorb pyramid power or something like that. You're being able to draw in this force or magical power. Then what you're doing is, and the very idea of a wand is that, you're able to take the power in, and then you're able to redirect it outward according to your will to change something. There's magic theory in a nutshell. And what changes in 1,000 different ways is what's the source of the power, okay, to do that. Okay. The other is I don't know enough to accomplish my will. So you end up with divination in its very forms. I seek knowledge, past, present, future, hidden, for me to be able to accomplish my purposes. Okay. And then the last one, all your little helpers, right? So spiritism, that you're getting in touch with ascended masters, fairies, elemental spirits. Again, it's just all over the map for these things. But to do what? So that they can accomplish your task for you that you can't do. So they're the aid in your magic, or they give you the knowledge that you seek. It's one of those two. Virtually every occult practice comes down to those three things. And like I said, the list here, the idea of, people using amulets, okay? An amulet is usually a way that it's a source of attracting power in some way, or storing magical power. By the way, too, when I get pastoral calls on this kind of stuff, people saying, yeah, they think they see stuff in their room. There's manifestations. They're hearing voices. So they say, well, step one, go through my list, check off anything in this you've been involved with. Because usually there's a triggering event of people getting involved in this stuff. Literally, the idea, I already mentioned chaos magic, chakras. The more Hinduism and New Age movement is getting popularized in the West, New Age has kind of died down, but now you just have generally Eastern religion, where remember, everything is divine. You forgot you were divine. So when you have to be trained enough so you get self-realization and finally realize that you're God. But chakras, these are your sevens in type. There's different types of Hinduism and Islam and just like everything else. But one type of Hinduism, your chakras are your spiritual pooling or energy points. And once you open them all up, the last one is basically the chakra, that's located in the head. And this ends up being, that's when you realize, that's when you get self-realization. And now you can perceive the spiritual world. Now you can do this. Now, every single one of these I spent a lot of time on in the class, but I'll just point you to a couple of things. All over the world, the idea of a chakra opening and seeing the spiritual world, that's in every pagan and polytheistic magical culture. In Scotland, Scottish Highlands and Northwestern European fairy lore, what do they call it? Second sight. It's literally every pagan culture has a version of almost all these things. Incubi and succubi, sex demons. I mean, things like that. There's just a different name for it, but it's the same type of phenomenology or the same practice. So anyway, but literally, you could come up with just about anything, and it's going to fit in one of these three categories. So when we, again, deal with this as occult practices, when you get involved with this, the bottom line is you open up the door to the world of demons. Whatever, people want to call it, the biblical worldview is clear. These are false religions. Paul has a lot to say on dealing with this stuff. But the reality is that when you open up the door to the demons, it's literally, Paul says, I don't want you to be partakers in demons. His Corinthian epistles, we're clear on this. He cites Deuteronomy 17. I could give you all the areas of applied magic, but it's like what? Healing magic, disease magic. How do I torment my enemies? We'll give them a disease. What do I want for me and my friends? Healing. Love magic, hate magic, persecution magic, defense magic, death magic. All of these are practiced by contemporary folks. So on a practical note, though, is that, and again, this is hours of lecture laying the foundation for this, but when you think of how demons operate, think of how the world operates now with fallen human beings in it. The wages of sin is death, right? All of you should be, yes, it is. That's what the Bible says. So, okay, yeah. Yes. And this is why it helps us. Every day I wake up and thank God that I'm not in hell screaming in agony where I deserve to be, because God doesn't know anyone's salvation. And anyone even that isn't saved right now has a suspended sentence that they get to live in common grace on earth in the image of God. So when you think about this, how many people are non-believers who sin every single day in thought, word, and deed and are still not dead? But the way law works and order works is there's a certain amount of sin you can do and still play with the other children. And there are certain things that if you sin, aka commit crimes, you go to jail. You don't get to play anymore. You either get a temporary timeout, or for capital punishment, you get a permanent timeout. Okay? And just, you look at the world of demons and angels, you look at the spiritual world around us, and it seems to operate on those same principles. Not all demons are locked up. They're out, they're free. You had a legion of them possessing a man in the Gadarene account, the Old Testament possession, and was, hey, let's, cast them out. Oh, can we go into that herd of pigs? Yeah, you had roughly 1,000 demons who were able to, they were possessing and accosting this one person. They had a chat with Christ. They recognized who he was. And they said, let us go into the herd of swine, which made the first batch of deviled ham. Okay, so I know, I'm fired. You're saying I want my money back. Okay, so That's okay. I have one about angel food cake in the Old Testament with where the angels bringing him the bread cake. And, that's all right. I know, dude. Just get to the point, man. Okay, so anyway, so for all that, there seem to be rules where there's certain amount of sins that demons can exist in, but we see some clues that where, like you see in Job 1 and Job 2, the devil comes to God, and you see there's permission that's given. And what, again, appears to be the case, and I think we can make a case for it, is that one of the things, if demons are going to interact with human beings, there's got to be some kind of permission that goes on. And that's why when you start giving them permission to interact with you by grabbing your Ouija board and, playing, Bloody Mary and doing all these other things, you're inviting the manifestations where the con artists and, the lies and everything else start. And so that's where it starts. And that's why in pastoral ministry, bottom line is when you have a rise in paganism and witchcraft, something in a culture. Now, the fact is, you're going to have more people with demon problems. It used to be, it was, those people in, Papua New Guinea or in Bali or, some place where there's overt, or in the Congo or some place where you have these overt practices of magical polytheism. The idea of Yoruba hoodoo, voodoo, Santeria, where the goal ultimately of all these together, it all starts with Yoruba, it moves to West Africa, becomes, hoodoo, voodoo when it goes to the Caribbean, and then you get it mixed up called Santeria. The entire goal there, which is true of a lot of these occult religions, is they beg the gods to possess them so they can do their magic. Wiccans, they do drawing down the moon. What do? They go out naked, sky-clad, and they're asking the goddess to possess them on the right time of the month so they can do their magic. This is what goes on. So there's an invitation, and then the problem is once it's invited in, there is no authority anywhere but God himself through Christ, who can deliver us from the domain of darkness. So part of pastoral training, especially now in the West and in America, where you've got an internet that's full of any kid, any person can go online and know every detail about how to practice witchcraft, paganism, spiritism in great detail. That means we have to be more prepared for that, not just doing our normal types of evangelism, but to whom else are they going to go for counseling? A lot of my counseling that I've done in this area, it's like they said they literally went to 9 or 10 churches in the past. Well, we don't do that kind of stuff. Why? Yeah, because they had deficient education, because they didn't believe in it, they didn't think it was important, and so on and so on. That's why I get all the calls from my 12,000 ex-students from the last 31 years. So, hey, you got a live one here, Kev. Yeah, it's a guy who, his family came in and they, daughter and her friend started playing with a Ouija boy because the 16-year-old daughter's boyfriend died in a car accident. And they wanted to talk to the dead boyfriend. And fast forward, all of a sudden, the messages were friendly for the first, couple of months. And then the boyfriend invited his friends to talk to the group through the Ouija board. And then the spirits were saying, it's kind of tedious, working through this Ouija board. Why don't you just let us come into you and talk to you? And then, that's when they start having manifestations and the messages turned nasty, but they couldn't deal with it. So got a call, met with them. There were manifestations and, for them, they were seeing this stuff. The father who I was with, I went to their house and I was standing right next to the guy and he's pointing out where the demons are. The guy starts screaming, they're on me, bent back with his eyes rolled back. And he was literally 90 degrees backward with his eyes wide. I laid my hand on the guy to pray for him, and I immediately went in. I couldn't see, and I went into vertigo. I couldn't speak. I couldn't do anything. And, so again, mentally, these are spirits, by the authority of Christ, I command you to leave. Everything was back to normal. But all this stuff is biblical phenomena. You look at the angels in the Old Testament that cause blindness and this and that. The stuff is real.